Have you ever had a neighbor who seemed just a little too perfect? Someone whose smile was always warm, whose garden always bloomed, and whose door was always open, yet something about them felt off. What if one day you discovered that this neighbor who seemed so sweet and harmless had been hiding a dark, twisted secret all along? This is the story of Edna Peterson, a woman who lived for years as the perfect neighbor in Maplewood Lane, Vermont. But beneath her gentle demeanor and neat little home lay a secret that would shake the town to its core. It was a peaceful, quiet town where everyone knew each other's name. In 1995, Maplewood Lane was the kind of place where neighbors looked out for each other. Edna Peterson was the epitome of this small-town kindness. At 72, she was the elderly widow who baked pies, kept her garden impeccable, and always had a smile for anyone who passed by. People loved her. She had lived on this street for decades, and her house was known for its beautiful flowers and calming, old-fashioned charm. But then, something strange began to happen. Newcomers to the area started noticing something unusual about Edna. Something they couldn't quite place, but something that didn't seem quite right. Take Sarah McAllister, a young woman who had recently moved into the neighborhood. Sarah was a curious soul, always eager to know about her neighbors. And Edna, well, she was a mystery. She seemed to know everyone's business, but no one really knew hers. She never spoke much about her past, always changing the subject whenever anyone mentioned her late husband, George. It was that subtle shift, that fleeting moment when Edna's smile would falter, that caught Sarah's attention. One afternoon, while Sarah was visiting Edna to welcome her with homemade cookies, she noticed something strange. As they sat in Edna's living room sipping tea, Sarah casually asked about her husband. Something about George never felt quite right. He had passed away years ago, but Edna always changed the subject when people asked. But that day, Edna's expression went pale. Edna whispered, almost to herself, "That's a story for another time." Sarah didn't press her further, but that sentence haunted her. What was Edna hiding? Who was George? And why did she refuse to speak about him? That night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She decided to do what any curious journalist would do. She began to dig. She started with the town's public records and local newspaper archives. At first, it seemed like there was nothing unusual. But then, Sarah stumbled upon an old article from 1963. It was about a man named George Peterson, who had mysteriously disappeared in Albany, New York. The article described how George had vanished without a trace, leaving behind his wife, Edna, and their young child. The article gave few details, but the absence of George Peterson in the years following his disappearance seemed suspicious. Sarah's heart raced. Could this be the same Edna Peterson who lived down the street? The dates lined up, but there was something missing, something that didn't make sense. Determined to find the truth, Sarah made a phone call to the Albany Police Department requesting any information on the case. What she discovered would forever change how she saw her neighbor. Chucky records were chilling. George Peterson had vanished from his home one night, leaving behind no clues, no body, just an abandoned house and a wife who claimed he had simply left. But then, one neighbor's account stood out. A woman reported hearing strange noises coming. From the Peterson home the night George disappeared, loud crashes, shouting, and then eerie silence. The neighbor said that just after the commotion, she saw Edna in the backyard, dragging something heavy behind her house. But the police had never found enough evidence to charge Edna with anything. George was presumed dead, but his body was never found. That was the last clue in the case, until now. Sarah decided to confront Edna, to ask her about the secrets she had kept hidden for so long. She invited Edna over for tea once again, but this time there was no small talk. Sarah brought up the article she'd found about George, watching closely for Edna's reaction. The room went cold as Edna's face turned pale. For the first time, Sarah saw something in Edna's eyes that wasn't kindness, it was fear. Edna remained silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "I didn't mean for it to happen. I was trying to protect myself." Edna's story spilled out in a rushed torrent. She admitted that her marriage to George had been filled with violence. He was abusive, controlling, manipulative, and sometimes cruel. The night George disappeared, they had fought once again. This time, Edna said, she couldn't take it anymore. In a moment of desperation, she struck him. He fell, hitting his head on the corner of the fireplace. He didn't get up. Panic consumed her. She didn't know what to do, so she buried his body in the backyard, in the garden where she had always felt safe. But Edna never told anyone. She never said a word, and the case went cold. But the worst part, Edna's confession wasn't over. Sarah had uncovered something far darker. When the police re-examined the property, they uncovered something they never expected. Edna had buried not one, but 2 bodies in her garden. The second body was that of a young woman named Margaret Fields, who had gone missing years before in the same neighborhood. Margaret had worked as a housemaid for the Petersons, but she had disappeared without a trace. And now, Edna's confession made it clear. Margaret had known something she shouldn't have, and Edna had silenced her forever. It was a revelation that stunned the entire town. The sweet, gentle Edna Peterson had been hiding a much darker side. The woman who had baked pies, cared for her garden, and offered a shoulder to lean on had been hiding a secret that nobody could have ever imagined. Edna passed away shortly after the investigation was reopened. Her secrets died with her, but the scars she left behind would never heal. The case remains one of the most haunting mysteries in Maplewood Lane's history. So, what do you think? Was Edna a victim of her circumstances, pushed too far by the abuse she suffered? Or did she have a darker side that was always there, lurking beneath the surface? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story captivated you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales like this one.